processes that we go through to make good decisions on behalf of the public. We pray as always for our safety. We go through the weekend. We pray for the upcoming week, and we feel better minds as well as our hearts. Forgive us of our sins and our shortcomings. In Christ's name.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Pitts.
Here.
Mr. Toller.
Here.
Mr. Foster.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Gould.
Here.
Having a quorum, I'll call the meeting to order. First thing on the agenda, approval of board or minutes for our regular meeting, which is held June 28th. Everybody had a chance to go over the minutes.
No tweaks, except as presented.
Mr. Pitts.
Yes.
Commissioner Toller.
Yes.
Mr. Foster.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Gould.
Have any public comments this morning? Anyone? Good, bad, or indifferent? Committee reports.
I attended one meeting. Basically, it's routine business for the most part. Lee, from what I understand, all the money has been transferred now.
That is correct.
Okay. I'm not,
The CD we kept at Alexandra because the interest rates.
that's all I have.
Anybody else? Angie and I met with two of the Anna City Commissioners this past week, or the week before, I don't remember, week before, pertaining to, even though you guys are on animal control, they came over here and we were discussing land out there and discuss some things about that and so forth, and I think that they're gonna have that on their agenda next week at their meeting, what I understand, so we should know something after that as far as moving it forward and starting to get us stuff together to build a new animal control shelter. There's a lot to be done on that, so. But anyway, we're in that phase and hopefully get an answer from them, and I think they got it cleared with the area that's flagged off is capable of being built on with no contamination or anything as far as the dump is concerned, so. But we'll wait to hear from that. That's all I have. I think everybody's aware from news media and watching it every day, the flood situation, hopefully is getting better. I think as of yesterday, I was told we still have 14 county roads that are underwater at some point or another. Again, the assessment and all that, they were pushing to get a final assessment this week from us, which we're trying to appeal that for another couple of weeks. Again, due to the fact of water on the road, we have no idea what kind of condition we're going to be in and what we're going to be spending to fix them. So they extended Alexander County 2 weeks, and we're hoping that they will us too on this. And it's still a daily battle. Hopefully we'll get there soon. Building permits.
We have 3 of them. The first one is parcel number
2406046A on Berryville Road in Jonesboro, across from 250. It's for a Michael Mason, a new home, no floodplain, previously subdivided, recommended for approval. The second one is for parcel number 140012237D. It's on Fox Lane in Jonesboro, for a Tom and Nancy Caldwell. New home, no floodplain, previously subdivided, recommended for approval. And the third one is for parcel number 103306793. It's 5495 State Route 3 North Wolf Lake. It's for a Kenneth and Connie Weeble, a pole barn, previously subdivided. It is in a floodplain, but the variance is attached.
Anybody have any questions about the building permits or anything to discuss? Not, get a motion to accept them.
I'll make a motion. Second.
Commissioner Pitts,
Yes.
Mr. Toller,
Yes.
Commissioner Foster,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Commissioner Gould.
Under old business, acceptance of 2018 Union County audit. All yours.
Hi, my name is Megan Cochran, and I was the director over the Union County audit this year, with Chad Lucas being the partner. First off, I want to thank all of the department heads and all of the employees for the assistance with the audit. I know that we asked a lot of questions and requested a lot of information, so everyone was very helpful during the audit process. I have for you two final copies, the audit report and the board communication. And we will start with the annual financial report, the audit report. And I'll just go through this pretty quickly, give you a chance to look it over, and if you have any additional questions afterwards, or after you have a chance to review anything, I'll be happy to go through those questions. Starting on page 1 is the independent auditor's report. This is basically the only thing that we do for the audit, the opinion over the financial statements. We noted, starting on page 2, a qualified opinion for the governmental activities due to GASB 75, accounting and financial reporting for post-employment benefits other than pensions, not being implemented for the fiscal year end. Last year, this is an update to GASB 45, and I know that due to the timing of the completion of the audit this past year, that the actuarial valuation that's required for GASB 75 wasn't budgeted to be performed for FY18. So everything else we have an unmodified opinion for the basic financial statements for the discreetly presented component unit and each major fund and the aggregate remaining fund information. So everything else was properly reported and fairly presented in all material respects. So on page 4 and 5 is the governmental activities, your statement of position, your statement of activities. And this includes all the activity of the county, including your capital assets, your long-term debt, and your net pension assets and liabilities. For the government-wide, you had a change in net position of an increase of $414,000 this year. Starting on page 7 is your major funds. Those are either material funds based upon a GASB calculation or funds that are of importance to the county. So that identifies separately the general fund, your Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, bond and interest, the ambulance fund, and the county investments. All other funds of the county are included in the last column, the non-major governmental funds. And the detail for all of that fund information starts on page 77, and that includes information for each fund, all the assets and liabilities and fund balances. On page 10 is your statement of revenues and expenditures and changes in fund balance. So normally the most important number on these is the net change in your fund balances. And for the county, for all of the funds overall, you had an increase in your fund balance of $57,000. Page 13 includes your internal service funds, your county fuel, and your employee benefit fund. The detail of each of those funds is included later in the report, starting on page 105. And for those two funds, you had an increase in that position of $3,000, which is pretty good for your internal service funds. You mainly want to break even, you want to charge for the services that you're providing to the county. Page 16 is your fiduciary funds. That includes all of your agency funds. You're basically holding money for others. So you have your assets and your liabilities. Page 17 starts the notes to the financial statements, and that information includes additional information over your accounting policies, additional detail over your capital asset changes, information over your calculation for the net pension asset and liabilities, additional details over your long-term debt. A lot of information to go over. So again, if you have any questions afterwards, you can feel free to ask. Starting on page 54 is just some required supplementary information. It mainly provides additional information over your Illinois Municipal Retirement Funds, your pensions for the county, the sheriffs, and the elected officials. Provides information over what you're required to contribute and what you did contribute during the year for the funds. It provides some additional details over how the net pension assets and liabilities are calculated. This year, you actually right now for the county IMRF fund, you have a net pension asset of $186,000 compared to a liability last year of 1.5. I believe in calendar year 2017, they had good investment return, so that helped for those numbers. May change in 2018 with the investment activity. But you also have a net pension asset in your elected officials of $230,000, and you have a liability in the sheriff's law enforcement of $284,000. So not too bad for 2017. The rest of the information for the required supplementary information is budget versus actual for your major funds. And then starting on page, let's see, pages 71. Pages 70 provides additional detail over your general fund, budget versus actual. And then starting on page 77, it provides additional information over the additional funds that I discussed. Those funds that are combined at the front of the financial statements, the detail is located starting on page 77. So I will skip over to page 113. This is our opinion, the independent auditor's report over internal controls and compliance in accordance with government auditing standards. We're required to report any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal controls in accordance with government auditing standards. And this year, you'll see on the last page, last year you had 7 findings. This year you have 5. You have 3 material weaknesses and 2 significant deficiencies. 3 of the findings from last year are not repeated, and we had 1 additional one this year. So just going through those quickly, on page 115 is the first finding, internal controls over financial reporting. We're required to report this material weakness if we identify any material adjustments during the audit process. And as the response notes, there was, I know with the timing of the audit, they did make improvements, they did make audit adjustments during the year, during FY18. So I think that this could potentially be removed in the next audit. I know that there's a process, a checklist for accumulating the information for FY19. The second one is the bank reconciliation procedures. We noted that some of the bank reconciliations didn't agree to the accounting software, and that I believe going forward, the county has a process in place to review any adjustments and make sure that any adjustments that were made after the bank reconciliation process is identified.
So that should possibly go away too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The third material weakness is an adequate journal entry review. We noted during the audit process that an individual has the ability to perform journal entries and that journal entry not be reviewed by a second individual. But I understand that this finding has already been corrected based upon your accounting software. You have the ability to set up a process to have journal entries be prepared by one individual and approved by a second individual. The fourth one is a significant deficiency, and it discusses controls over fines and fees assessed by the court. During the audit, we noted judicial orders where the order did not agree to what the fines or fees are required to be assessed based upon statute. And we did, I believe, a couple of the differences were noted based upon interpretation of what a fine and fee is based upon statutes. We might interpret the fee or determine an amount as a fine or a fee, and the program that's being used to assess those fines and fees interpreted a different way. So those were the two, I believe, main reasons for those differences. But a large number of those differences, I believe, relate to fines or fees. A number of them were being changed effective July 1st, 2019. So depending on the changes, this finding may be gone next year as well, depending on how they change the assessments. And the last one is time and attendance reporting. We just noted that the process is still slightly decentralized. And I know that due to the timing of when the audit was complete versus the period that we were auditing, they were still in the process of implementing the changes for the time and attendance for the tracking of compensated absences. And as I noted, the last page of the report identifies the prior year findings and the ones that were repeated and the ones that were not repeated from the prior year.
Those that were repeated, again, by our response and what you're saying, more like it should be all there next time, so.
Yeah. Allows for more time to correct, or some that are already corrected now. And just quickly, the second one, the auditor's communication to the county board of management includes required communication that we're required to disclose to those charged with governance. Any changes in accounting policies, any disagreements with management, or which there were none. And we also include the audit adjustments within the report, any adjustments that were determined not to be material and were passed upon during the audit, and then additional recommendations or communication or comments that were identified during the audit that didn't rise to a material weakness or a significant deficiency. Just recommendations. We live in a perfect world, and so depending on the processes, I know sometimes it doesn't always work out for the municipality, for the county, but just recommendations that we identified.
So Megan, I have a question. On your adjusting journal entries, how do we know which ones need posted and which ones how'd you say it, overlook because they weren't material, or?
Yeah. So starting on page 19, those are all adjustments that have been passed upon that you don't have to make.
Okay, I see. Okay. All right, perfect.
Anybody have any questions? No? I have a question, and I know time elapsed. You all were a little bit behind and everything else, and I know the circuit clerk was tied up pretty much when you got the final stuff to her and couldn't respond with her reply on the findings. I mean, I personally would like to, and Tiffany in here?
Yes,
Yeah.
I actually did respond, Max, and I had communication with Ana. I had responded by 3:30 yesterday and had all my responses in and stayed late until about 4:15 and was in communication with Angie. So as far as I knew, it was being presented today, and I had an email from Ana asking me to bring my signed letter, which I did. So everything was complete yesterday from me.
That's the only thing that we didn't have time for our administrative team is get the responses in to get the bound copies.
Okay.
So everything,
I mean, have you looked at the responses?
yeah, I gotta double check them and make sure that everything looks good. I believe so, but otherwise, all of the information within the report is complete.
So is that satisfied? She's saying that, I mean, I need some opinions here.
I mean, you say it's looked good, right?
Yeah.
And she's still good, she can present the circuit clerk's audit.
Yep, I can present the information
Okay,
too.
okay.
Okay. And I provided a copy of the circuit clerk report, in a paper copy. Starting on page 1 is our independent auditor's report, in our opinion, over the circuit clerk's fiduciary fund. We had an unmodified opinion. Everything was presented fairly in all material respects in regards to the circuit clerk's fund. Starting on page 4 is the independent auditor's report on internal controls over financial reporting and compliance in accordance with government auditing standards. Within that report, we identified one material weakness and one significant deficiency. And I will go through those. Those are a little further back in the report. Page 6 includes the assets and liabilities of the circuit clerk fund, the cash, and then of that cash, the amount that due to others or due to other funds of the county. Page 7 includes just notes the financial statements, significant accounting policies used for the circuit clerk fund, and additional information over the cash and investments. Page 10 includes the schedule of changes in assets and liabilities. It includes the funds that came in and the funds that were dispersed based upon the different fees that are required to be dispersed. The ending balances are the November fines and fees that were collected that were dispersed at the beginning of December. Starting on page 13 is the report J, the annual financial report that the circuit clerk's office is required to compile. And that provides additional detail and information of the expenses of the circuit clerk's office and the type of fines and fees that are dispersed to the different agencies. Starting on page 26 is our examination report on compliance based upon the compliance over the 5 items that the circuit clerk, what we were required to review based upon the circuit clerk audit guidelines. We noted one item that is identified non-compliance, and I'll go through that. So starting on page 28 is the material weakness in regards to the circuit clerk preparing a year-end trial balance in a format recommended by the Administrative Office of the Illinois Courts. And I believe that we provided the template, the trial balance template, to the circuit clerk's office. And the monthly bank reconciliation, a recommendation for that process. The significant deficiency, that's also a significant deficiency identified in the overall audit that we discussed previously, the judicial orders over the fines and fee requirements. And as we discussed, a number of those fees were had changes effective July 1st, 2019. So this one could possibly go away this next year.
Correct.
Yep. And the third one is related to the outstanding bond reports. The report includes bonds that are held for various cases that were indicated as closed. I believe this has been a repeated item in previous audits, and I know that it takes time to go through the cases to determine if they can be closed.
But again, your response to us as far as having read the responses, you feel like we're good to go.
I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
I just don't want to vote on something and
Have it change.
have it change.
Yes,
So,
yes.
I mean, I'm trusting, I know Tiffany worked extra hard and again, time constraints, I
Yeah,
understand.
yeah. No, I don't believe that
Follow all this
anything
stuff.
based upon the responses will
Okay.
change.
Any questions, guys?
No?
Yeah.
She's comfortable with it.
Max, I had shared my responses also with Angie and explained to her on those differences, because there was an A fund and a U fund, and then Lorraine had changed with the computer software, so we're gonna be turning all that over to unclaimed property this year, so that will all wash itself out and we'll turn it over to the state, so that money will go back to balancing on the.
Ken, did you second that? Sorry.
Yes.
You said, okay. You ready for a vote then, Max?
Yes.
Commissioner Pitts,
Yes.
Commissioner Toller,
Yes.
Commissioner Foster,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Gould.
I appreciate your hard work, the board does. I know I know you spend a lot of time here, so. Hope next year's report's even better. Okay, moving on. Next on the agenda, subcontractor agreement. County and,
I missed B.
well, I'm sorry, yeah, we're gonna table B.
Okay.
At this point. Still working on that, right?
Instead of the Magus
On the
agreement,
mutual aid.
yes, we received more information that's already been forwarded to Angie, and I believe
Okay.
it's in process.
Yes.
Explanation.
I'm back. This is the agreement between Caritas, Family Solutions for MST therapies for the Revere, Illinois clients that they receive. It's for 5 clients for the year at $10,200 per client, totaling $51,000. The reason we had to bring it back this week is that we included in the contract that they would be invoicing us at an hourly rate as opposed to sending us like a bulk, it's not, we're itemizing more clearly in this contract.
If everybody remembers, we had these all approved before, a couple of them, we had to make a couple changes on, so this one's complete now. Can I get a motion to approve this contract agreement, please?
Second.
Commissioner Pitts, Commissioner Toller,
Yes.
Commissioner Foster,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Gould.
And we're still tabling,
We are still tabling with Sigerson. We're waiting on the contracts.
very good.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Do you want me to stand back up? You'll just go to minutes. The next one is the lease agreement between ourselves and the bank board, which is under new business.
Okay.
Yeah, lease agreement.
Yeah, so
Between Union County and Bank
exactly, and that's for the leased minivan we'll be using for transportation with the redeploy program. There was a change to the original contract with the state that we were going to pay $1,057 per month. This contract, actually, we ended up, we'll be paying $864 a month. So we went down after a little bit of negotiation and time to $864 a month as opposed to the $1,057 per month. So that's reflected in this contract.
Do you want to expound on this a little bit? As
Sure.
far as the vehicle, I mean, I think it's pretty new for everybody. And
Yes, it is. So when they did an audit from the state last year prior to my arrival, one of the things that the stakeholders in county all the way down to the river, we don't oftentimes have a way for these clients to get from home to therapies, Vienna and different areas in Jackson County, things like that. So they wanted me to solve for transportation. And one of the solutions that are allowed within the confines of the grant is to lease vehicles and then drive the client to and from. So I talked to Angie about it, and we went through some of the liability issues. We talked to Tyler. So in order to cover off from the insurance perspective for the county, we are including a camera in the car that will be on the 72-hour loop, and it will be self-erasing. And you know, in fairness, I don't know how often we'll use this vehicle for those purposes, but it can be used by any of the people that are employed at Free Deploy, which would be myself and the coordinator. Then we also have the Melissa Grissom transportation option, which is an independent contractor who will sign a contract with us. She will have her own insurance, her own vehicle, and we would disperse her out, kind of like an Uber driver. So if we had a kid that, you know, a probation officer that called us and said a kid needs to get X, Y, and Z, we probably would use Melissa first, and then this would be a secondary transportation solution for the redeploy program this year.
so basically, long and short of it, I mean, this was a requirement in the grant. The grant is paying this lease.
Oh yeah, the grant's paying the lease, they're paying the insurance.
No, because the county is not out any money on this.
No, absolutely not. They're paying for the camera, they're paying for the insurance, they're paying for the lease. And the organization that we're using is used throughout the southern region, and they purchase the vehicles and then send them to the schools to use as driver's ed vehicles. So we use that company because they're used to doing business with counties and school districts.
And I might add, in return, her hard work on all this and agreeing to do all this, is able to get the grant to be considerably higher than what we had anticipated. So,
And your lease is only for 12 months because
Correct.
we wanted it to be just the period of the grant. So if next
Right.
grant period they change their mind, you're not stuck in a lease.
No, we're out. They're going to deliver it to us probably after the signing of this next week, and then we will return it on June 30th of next year. Unless, of course, you know, the grant continues and they tell us to keep the vehicle, then we would renegotiate the rate again. But for the win on this one is that they brought the price down, as far as I'm concerned, so.
I'll make the motion that we accept this lease agreement from Union County with Bank Corp.
Mr. Pitts?
Yes.
Mr. Toller?
Yes.
Mr. Foster?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes,
Mr. Gould?
thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll see you one more time.
One more time.
Approved payment of bills, everybody had a chance to go over the bill list. Either by email or just pay the time. Any questions? Move with the
I put you down, so you guys find it later. Mr. Pitts?
Yes.
Mr. Toller?
Yes.
Mr. Foster?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Gould?
Next on the agenda, we have a 1989 Chevrolet R3500 that we declare as surplus. Correct me, that's from which?
It's a ESDA vehicle that they're not using and that the highway department would like. So parts for it.
Parts.
Yes.
I have a motion to declare this vehicle as surplus.
I'll make it. Second.
Mr. Pitts?
Yes.
Mr. Toller?
Yes.
Mr. Foster?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Commissioner Gould?
Yes.
Okay, next on the agenda is approval of Union County Printer copier bid for lease. Everybody had a chance to look at your spreadsheets. I think the bids were open when,
Monday, maybe? I can't remember the day. We received 4 bids. We received a bid. We usually do the dollar buyout, so that at the end of the lease that the county will own it. We have the low bid was with CDS for $129.25 a month. And then we also got bids from Heartland Digital for $135.40, GFI Digital for $152.73, and TNI for $171. And then below that, if you're on the second page, where the graphs are on the front, if you're on the second page, below that it shows you the cost for black and white and color. And so then on the first page, the bottom section of the graph is for the dollar buyout. The top section is for the fair market value. So like I said, we normally do the dollar buyouts. Blue section is for the lease amount. The red section is for the maintenance. And that's to have the maintenance include supplies. So you have the option of getting the lease in the blue section without doing the maintenance. So, but normally we do the maintenance also.
Mr. Miller, I say something.
yes,
I sold the Judge's Dock 17, 2009. I talked to Angie about this. They've had it 10 plus years, and they've done 61,000 black and 6,000 color, which is an average of 530 black and 53 color a month. They had a problem that as old as the machine was, it was going to cost $1,500, $2,000 possibly to replace parts that needed replaced in it. So we gave them a price of $3,000 on a machine that was 45 a minute. Not that they need the 45 a minute. 45 a minute will run up to 40, 50,000 copies a month. They did 61,000 in 10 years. So it used a lot lesser machine, or give another bid for machine cost $4,800, which I think was $9, $99 a month. And that's guaranteed for 3 years supply and service. Of course, at 6,000 copies a year, it's not much to guarantee, or that's not much to guarantee. I just think it's, I've had 90% of equipment over the last 10 or 20, 30, 40 years. Not that I need to have it, so I'm not a little bit, but we take care of the people, we contact them, contact us, we're here. And the judge's office, like I say, has had no problem with the machine, just the age of the machine, you think needs replacing. And that's the reason the 45-minute price got in, because we were going to give them this machine for $3,000 and guarantee it for a year. But we would like to continue with the business, not that we deserve all the business, but we also don't deserve people come in shooting those blocks because they want to. I enjoy taking care of the county.
Well, I understand all that, George, and I appreciate that, but that's why we're doing the bid process now. We gave the specs out for the bid, and everybody bid, and
I understand
that's what we're looking at, but I know,
But
but
talking about 500 months copies, you get that 45-minute machine.
I understand. And
Anybody have any questions from the spreadsheet in front of them? I'll make a motion to select CDS as the vendor for leasing this printer and authorize the county administrator to work out the details and sign the lease. Do I have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Commissioner Pitts,
Yes.
Commissioner Tiller,
Yes.
Commissioner Foster,
Yes.
Commissioner Miller,
Yes.
Commissioner Gould.
Next on the agenda is approval of Union County Clerk computer bids. Do I vote on the bids?
Since you guys, we did an RFP for new computers in our office, some which is one we'll need for sure for the new recording software, and just new computers in general, we were way overdue. Sent out RFP, have 3 bids, Mayor Network, CDS, and MRA International, 3 submitted bids. For the Mayor Network turned in a bid of $7,848.41. CDS was $7,795.82. And MRA International submitted a bid of $7,539.64, but they were unable to quote a licensing agreement that required for the new scanner, which values anywhere from $534 to $638, depending on Mayor or CDS's bids what they quoted. So they would end up being higher. My recommendation is to go with Mayor Network's bid. They were roughly $50 higher, but I feel that since they're our current vendor with our current situation, all of our networking and does all of our installations and all that stuff, I feel like for no more than that I feel like we need to stay with them. So that would be my recommendation, go with Mayor Network on this bid.
Anyone have any questions or concerns?
I move we accept the license recommendation.
I would like to add to that motion, David, if you would authorize the county administrator to work out the details and sign the purchase order on that.
Fine.
I have a second.
I'll second.
Commissioner Pitts,
Yes.
Commissioner Kohler,
Yes.
Commissioner Foster,
Yes.
Commissioner Miller,
Yes.
Commissioner Gould.
Last item on the agenda, resolution appointing directors of the Union County Hospital District. All 3 of these people were presently on the board. They all would like to be reappointed. So the resolution reads appointing Chris Boyd, Brad Thomas, and Raleigh Hawk. All 3 terms would expire June 30th, 2022. Any questions or concerns?
make a motion, we appoint these three gentlemen back to the Union County District Hospital Board.
Mr. Pitts,
Yes.
Mr. Toller, Commissioner Foster,
Yes.
Commissioner Miller,
Yes.
Commissioner Gould.
I think we have anything for executive session, do we? Any other business anybody needs to bring up? No. I need a motion to adjourn.
Awesome.
Mr. Pitts,
Yes.
Mr. Toller, Commissioner Foster,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Gould.
Yes.